Officer down! I repeat, officer down!
Welcome back to 1033. This is your host, Nathan Kapler, a podcast created for a first responder by a first responder. If you are not a first responder, you still are welcome. This podcast is aimed directly at trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is complex and often misunderstood. Our brave men and women who serve our communities often end up with behavioral and psychological issues as a result of experienced trauma from their careers. My goal is to share what I know, my personal experience with PTSD as a retired police officer, and continue to advocate for mental health while providing support to those still in their careers. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical help, and I strongly suggest if you are in fact suffering, you seek out professional medical advice. Please join me on this episode as I continue to expose the reality of PTSD challenges. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to 1033. Today's episode, we have no guests. No one other than myself. We're kicking it old school. We're going back to almost a season 1 type of feel. But this episode is an episode based in transition while we segue out of season 2 into a quick side project before we end up with season 3. Now, before we talk about the side project and what's beyond that, season 3, I wanted to take a quick moment to come back to the fact that season 2 and how important it was for even in my own journey to understand that we truly are not alone. Hearing the statement of "you are not alone" oftentimes doesn't have the same impact as when we actually are connected with someone who truly understands what our struggle may look like. From a personal perspective, as someone who has gone through post-traumatic stress as a first responder, I don't know how many times I was told you are not alone. But still the other side, the other person that was giving that lifeline, trying to help, was also unable to speak about their own struggle. Healing in that moment can be incredibly limited. Connection in that moment can be incredibly limited. And only when both parties are truly able to show up and be vulnerable and authentic about what they are struggling with, if you are in PTSD, can that finally promote some sort of healing, some sort of connection and conversation. When I first began season 1, I had no idea where this was going to go. I was struggling with an inability to tell my own story. Struggling with an inability to share the pain and suffering that I had endured and most likely was still enduring up to that moment. You see, up until that point, I really hadn't shared my story. And for some reason, I was actually very fearful of it, thought that I would be judged by others. But in that moment, after having had shared my story, my experience with others, all of a sudden now, was deeper. It was more rich. So the very thing that I was fearful of, the very thing that I was scared of, which would be the judgment of others, never happened. Instead, my story was celebrated by many. Friends, family, people in my inner circle, complete strangers from across the world, wrote in thanking me for sharing my story so that they could see their own story, their own journey, their own pain, their suffering. And what ushered in next was season 2, an opportunity now for other people, other first responders to step up and acknowledge what their story looked like. The incredible people that stepped up should be named, for it takes courage and vulnerability to step forward and share what your story looks like. Lori White, Adam Hederi, Sachin Lati, Mike Wilford, Jess McLean, Trina Tulk, Jay Anderson, Phil Jacobson, Nick Motichka, Mark Bouchard, Paulette Bro, Chance Burles, Barry Rhodes, Sean Conahan, Matt Johnston, Reg Laviolette, and Daniel Sundahl. Now, there were a few that wanted to remain anonymous, and I will respect that. But all of these amazing people made up Season 2. They were firefighters, nurses, paramedics, police officers, and corrections, all who had experienced trauma in their life and were at their own various stages of awareness and healing and understanding and acceptance. And each story had a very significant, important theme to it, whether it was hope or how to look at our struggle with a different perspective. What are some of the challenges that happen within? And what does this life look like with this beast? Most importantly, these people believed that in order to help others, we have to do the hard work. We have to share our story. We have to offer hope and a helping hand for those that are still struggling in silence and maybe don't know how to come out of this. From my perspective, these people are invested in leaving a positive impact on the world through sharing their own vulnerability, their own pain and suffering, what they've learned, and how they've grown. I will never be able to thank them enough for their contribution for this project and for the outpouring of support that has continued to come in as a result of this project continuing on. I believe that true leadership now is comprised of vulnerability and authenticity, and also courage. Courage to step forward to share your story, to share the things that you might be hiding from, and to give yourself that chance to be free. This podcast continues to teach me things that I never anticipated learning. I knew that community and connection and conversation were important pillars to mental health. I didn't realize how important they were until I had all of these 20 people on who shared their story and who I was able to connect with, and am now connected most likely for the rest of my life and theirs. I didn't recognize when I began Season 2 how much compassion it was going to take to meet people in their space, in the space of their struggle, to hear them, to feel them, and to support them as they told their story. And that in of itself is the biggest lesson I learned with Season 2, is that we need to do a better job of supporting one another, supporting them for what they are going through, to show up with the deepest form of compassion possible, to allow them an opportunity to pull themselves out of where they are at. I've learned and experienced that healing can happen within. But when you have the love and compassion and support of people around you who are there for you on that level, your healing journey happens so much faster. We are social creatures. We thrive on connection. And when we do not have connection, we tend to fall apart. We all just went through a period of social isolation with COVID, and we are starting to see the aftermath of that. Not only that, but we started to see the impacts in real time, our own mental health, as we were socially isolated, mandated by the government for over 2 years. So as Season 2 comes to a close, I wanted to echo this important message, that your well-being, all pillars of your health, depend on more than just yourself. Now, before we kick off with Season 3, we are going to enter into a side project that is going to be based off of an idea. This idea came to me from a fan, someone who is connected to the podcast. They're interested in getting into a role of a first responder, and they had many questions. So I wanted to shift for a moment. So for the next 3 episodes, we are going to run a series called So You Want to Be a Cop. And we are going to tackle some of the hard questions geared towards what it takes for a civilian to transition from civilian life to the role of a police officer or first responder. Following the conclusion of those 3 episodes, we will then shift into Season 3. And Season's 3 theme will be the care providers behind the first responders. The people that are involved in the community that are there to support first responders as they struggle with their mental health or post-traumatic stress. And how they help to raise awareness for those individuals and to promote healing. Beyond that, the podcast is continuing to grow, and I will forever be grateful for that. What started off as a passion project has now blossomed into something with stability and a future. So once again, thank you for your continued support. Thank you for joining me on this journey and even challenging yourself to look at yourself and grow from wherever you are at. The stories I continue to receive are truly inspirational. I hope you enjoyed Season 2, and I can't wait to see you in our side project and beyond in Season 3. Thank you for your continued support with this project, and thank you for tuning in today.